Our Super Bowl reaction presented by Uber Eats. Get game day deals all season long on Uber Eats. It's my fave. It's time to look at this weekend's tastiest matchup in this week's Sunday Night Food Ball, brought to you by Uber Eats. All right, well, between the Luka trade and the Chiefs getting humiliated, I did not have that as a two-team parlay. um, I was thinking about this. Listen, the Chiefs are going to be fine. They knew they were going to probably draft an offensive tackle in the first round, and there's plenty of them. But it's interesting. Brady's 3 Super Bowl losses, the point differential was minus 15. He could have literally run the table. Mahomes, it's minus 53 with 2 Super Bowl losses. He'll be 3-2 in Super Bowls. But I do think I would say this again. Philadelphia, we both said they have the better roster. It's just hard to go against Andy Reid on 2 weeks and Mahomes, who never loses close games. I did not think it would be this. But I do think, one of the things I was thinking in the first half is that, Brady would always generate something. He was just so good pre-snap. And it was a little, listen, I know Philadelphia's defense is dynamic. And, we didn't think Kansas City would run much on them. But were you a little disappointed that they couldn't generate 6 and 7 yard throws? They couldn't max protect. It was like they weren't moving off their game plan.
Yeah, I thought they were overwhelmed at levels in which you just don't see good teams overwhelmed to the line of scrimmage. Because it wasn't just edge pressures, it was interior pressures. I mean, Mahomes was under siege. They had, I think, 7 yards after the first quarter, Colin. Or, excuse me, 19 yards on 7 plays. That's because they got a first down on the first play from scrimmage, and then they essentially went 3 and out, 3 and out. So I just thought the defensive line, remember 2 years ago when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl, they led the league in sacks, and they had an excellent
Yeah.
defensive line. I don't think this defensive line was looked as good as that one because it wasn't productive top to bottom. But the way they played tonight, I mean, that's as well as you can play. And I don't know what you can do when your defensive tackles are doing that, when your defensive
Well,
ends are doing that. I mean, the Chiefs do have a guard playing left tackle.
right. Well, 10 quarterback hits, 6 sacks, 0 blitzes. I mean, think about that. And, as I was watching this game with Philadelphia, I kept thinking about this. For years and years, when Peyton Manning was in your division or Brady was, it affected how people in the division
Yeah.
drafted. You watch Philadelphia's D and O lines, and if you're the Rams or the Lions or San Francisco or Dallas, don't you watch this game and think, Jesus, I'm the Rams. I'm like, corner or defensive tackle in the third round. Like it was so dominating that it makes me think all the rivals of the Eagles have to look at this and think, we've got to get better in the lines, or we're not going to compete with this team for
Yeah, I mean,
years.
that's to me, Howie and Andy has done this too. And the 2 Super Bowls they've lost, their offensive line has just let them down in those games. I mean, the Tampa situation, remember, they were missing 2 tackles, and tonight they just got overwhelmed. But it's not just Jalen Carter tonight, right? I mean, Brandon Graham does everything to come back off a
Sweat.
torn shoulder or elbow. Sweat was incredible. Milton Williams has that play destroying. He was a third round pick years ago. Like he's about to be a free agent. He's going to get a ton of money. And to me, the offensive line for the Eagles, how about the difference when they would go back and forth? The Chiefs would punt and then the Eagles would come back and you'd be like, well, they're just not generating any pressure. Jalen's sitting back there having a hot dog. He's having some gumbo in the backfield. Just who's open, who's not. I'll just scramble. Where Mahomes, within a second, he's moving around, scrambling left and right. And yeah, I just think the offensive line and defensive line for the Eagles tonight, and really all season down the stretch, once they remember they started slow, like 2-2, and then since then they were the best team in football. And tonight they dominated. They absolutely dominated this game.
Yeah, I mean, before tonight, Kansas City had won the last 9 playoff games where they did not score first, where they
Yeah.
trailed. Um, but in those games, I mean, it was really interesting. Even early in the game, my first take after the first 3 drives for each team is It's one thing if you make mistakes, if you're nervous. I'm like, Jesus, that Philadelphia is not even adding edge pressure. They're just putting their four guys out there and they can't block them. As I look at over my notes, only 3 minutes time of possession in the first quarter. I think we forget we've been spoiled, John. We've had, first of all, it was a great season. The quarterback play has never been better. Um, a lot of people that are watching our podcast right now are in their 20s and 30s. This is what Super Bowls look like in the late 70s and 80s and 1990. I can remember the Giants beating Denver 39-20, and then San Francisco beating Denver 55 to
Yeah.
10. And Denver got beat by Washington 42 to 10, and then the Raiders hammered a couple of teams. You go back to the 80s right now, Google it if you're listening to us and you're watching at home. This is what Super Bowls looked like. I mean, there was a decade. People always talk about the 70s NBA where there were no great teams. The 80s NFL were very few great Super Bowls. So we were on a run. We've had so many good Kansas City Buffalo games or Buffalo Baltimore games. We've just been so lucky in the AFC with Mahomes and Allen and Lamar. But there was a run in college football with Alabama. This is what the title games were looking like. The Bama Notre Dame. This is what Super Bowls look like. So we hadn't had. I thought the Celtics Mavericks was a lopsided mess, but this is one of those where I think it resonates beyond the game. I think you look at Philadelphia, and they're going to have an impact on the draft and free agency. People will feel like in the NFC, you cannot compete with this roster for the next 2 to 3 years if you just don't get better up
Well, I
front.
also think it's pretty rare in football, right? The coaches are such stars, where in basketball and baseball, the executives can be pretty big names. In basketball,
Yeah,
GMs are a really big deal. Listen, I've known Brett Veach for, I don't know, 15 plus years. Brett Veach is a stud, and he's well known. I mean, he should be. He's been to 5 Super Bowls. He won 3 of them. But Howie is kind of the guy that serves the drink with the Eagles. He is much closer to someone in baseball or basketball where he's the boss.
yeah.
When they needed coordinators, he's going after Vic Fangio. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Sirianni. Clearly, the guys, they beat to his drum. Like, he gets them going from a inspirational standpoint, and he's good with the players, but he doesn't call plays or anything. And he's a younger guy. It's pretty rare to see a CEO head coach in his early 40s. But the talent on that team and the offseason moves. I mean, Colin, they signed a 1 year, $4 million Becton, who was fantastic at guard. They got Zach Bond, immediate All Pro, and they got Saquon Barkley, who had one of the better seasons in the history of the league. So, I
Look
mean,
at
it's
this.
it's
The
remarkable. Howie
last
Roseman became a Hall of Famer tonight. He's won 2 Super Bowls with 2 different coaches and 2 different quarterbacks.
the last three Eagle drafts: Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis, N'Kobe Dean, Cam Jurgens, Devontae Smith, Landon Dickerson, and
Not
Milton
bad, huh?
Williams. I mean, that
Jeez.
that is just absolutely freaking insane.
But let's factor
And
it. Let's
he deserves
factor
all
in
of it.
AJ Brown trade, sign Saquon Barkley. I mean, think about the other things he's done
Well,
on top
you
of
know,
those draft picks.
it makes me think about this. I was watching the other day, I was watching Rick Pitino at St. John's. St. John's was a dead
Yeah.
program. Rick Pitino takes it over a couple years. You're like, Jesus, are they one of the 7 to 8 best teams in the country? Now, I don't know if they are, but Pitino, he grinds his staff, he grinds his players. He's a very good recruiter. There are just guys that are better. And in every industry, the top 5% of realtors make 90% of the money. And you just start looking at some of these places like Cincinnati, they can't keep, they are 2 years ahead of paying Jamar Chase, and they're already bailing on defensive players. This roster, the only roster I can compare it to is the Seahawks roster. The one that Brady beat in the Super Bowl, where, I mean, they're defensively, it just Richard
Yeah.
Sherman.
Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor. I mean, Michael Bennett. They were Bobby Wagner in his prime. They were loaded.
Yeah, they were absolutely loaded. But um, yeah, do listen, Andy Reid, I don't think there's much you can do. I just think they got sacked. And both, by the way, both Super Bowls that Kansas City's gotten drubbed, they just couldn't protect
No.
Mahomes. But it was different. In the first one, they were missing a left tackle. They moved Tooney over. It was still a mess. And nothing they could do. It's interesting about this is that I'm watching Jalen Hurts tonight. And I've always said I think he's kind of a B-plus guy in the pocket, really good athlete. I love his personality, like Dak Prescott, really mature. In a noisy locker room, and a noisy coach, and a noisy city, and a noisy, talk radio. He's just the perfect kind of temperament, just a really mature, smart kid. But I was watching him tonight. First of all, there's a couple of routes he throws really well. One of them, the sideline route, he's great at it. And the other one is that kind of underneath that tight end route that Goddard gets about 3 a game. And you know, it's just interesting for all the questions about Jalen Hurts. This is almost, like when the Warriors are playing small ball, and we've never in our life thought the NBA, the smallest team would win. And the Warriors had like this 6-year run. You're like, what the hell is this? And everybody was chasing it. And we were all going, what is this? And, it's just interesting to watch this Philadelphia team is that Jalen Hurts with any other team, we may look at this and just think, this doesn't work. I'm not so sure. He's not the perfect quarterback for this team. From the tush push to his personality to he's the routes he throws well are perfect. I just look at him tonight and I'm like, sometimes it's just fit. Draymond Green fit on that Warriors team. He plays for the Wizards. Does he ever make an impact? But I love Hurts with this line, with Barkley, with the crowd, with the organization.
He can be, let's face it, I mean, they've won a lot of games when he's been off, and it speaks to the talent on their team. But there is no disputing when he's on, they are an unstoppable force. And you felt it early tonight. You're like, God, he looks pretty comfortable. He looks on. Even that A.J. Brown pass that he had early in the game that they called pass interference on A.J., you went, oh, he's kind of feeling it. In his
Jahan Dotson early.
Oh, how about that play call was fantastic. And Jalen hit him. He throws his go ball. Is he a little bit the modern day Russell Wilson? I mean, his deep ball is pretty beautiful.
He is the modern day Russell Wilson. Well, we don't love him in the pocket. You wish he was bigger.
Probably a more dominant runner.
Leader.
I feel a little bit. Russell didn't run quite as much. He did early, I guess, but I feel like Jalen's a little bit more powerful as a runner, a little more, I don't know, just more dynamic in the open field. Though Russ was good when he was young.
No, I do think we have to. And listen, I don't want to overreact to the game, but in this instance, John, it's hard not to overreact. I mean, I'm watching the Celtics drub the Knicks last night, and I'm like, this Celtics team has so much depth. I'm not trying to overreact, but when they won the finals last year, you're like, they're like significantly better than every team in the league. And I watched them last night, and I'm like, I'm not overreact. Boston's going to win it again. Yeah. They're just better than everybody. And I'm watching Philadelphia here, and I'm like, this team's not going anywhere, because it would be one thing if the quarterback was cocky, or if they had a bunch of free agents, or they didn't draft well. John, 7 of their best players are like in year 1 or 2.
Well, think about it. They just won the Super Bowl, and 2 of the better players in franchise history, Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox, had retired this year. So, you know what hit me tonight is, remember when Fangio and the Miami Dolphins got a divorce, and then Howie hires him 24 hours later, and the Dolphins, he was just too mean. He was too demanding. It's like, guys, this is football, and this is defensive football. I got news for you. The guy knows what he's doing. And the one thing we've seen with Vic, with Jim Harbaugh, the one year when he was with the Nagy and the Bears, and they traded for Khalil Mack, and then this year you give him talent, it is on. Because one thing you and I talked about is his record against Andy Reid, but it's like, well, really, if you siphon those teams out, he did not have good teams in Denver. So nothing of the caliber of talent that he was rolling into this Super Bowl with. I mean, Colin, when you have one good unit, you could have a good defense, right? When all 3 of your levels of defense are good, their defensive line is outstanding. The linebackers, they have an all-pro linebacker in Bond who had a pick tonight. And then all their DBs are good. I mean, CJ will hit, Cooper DeJean and Mitchell, the rookie corners, are excellent. And Slay is still a solid player. So they're good at every single level of the defense. And they have one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. He can't win it because he's a coach. But if you told me they gave the Super Bowl MVP to Vic Fangio, because the game it felt like over pretty early on, because defensively, the Eagles were, I don't remember the 85 Bears, but I would imagine they smothered them. And it was like, have they even made it past midfield? And then finally Burkhart's like, they have not crossed midfield yet. And like, didn't feel like it.
That was this week's Sunday Night Food Ball, brought to you by Uber Eats. My fave is the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Uber Eats has the best game day deals all season long. Order now for game day. And now for our segment, Hot Off the Press, presented by our friends at Louisiana Hot Sauce. This stuff's great. Bring the food at your big game party to a whole new level with the original Louisiana brand hot sauce. Bold, authentic flavor embodies the rich culinary tradition of Louisiana. I'm going to the Super Bowl in New Orleans. Can't wait. The original Louisiana brand hot sauce, perfect for those who demand great flavor with just the right amount of heat. This stuff is remarkable. Jalen Hurts wins the MVP, John. 17 of 22 for 221 yards passing, couple of touchdowns, an ugly pick, rushed 11 times for 72 yards. I think it's your classic Jalen Hurts. I think you and I have talked about this. When he's rolling, that offense looks like it should never punt. And I also think two things are true with Jalen Hurts. He knows what he is. And I think the Eagles determined what he was about game 6 or 7. Remember, they lost earlier in the season to Atlanta.
Yeah.
I think it takes people time to figure out what they are themselves, and then teams to figure out what you are. And I think him throwing the ball 22 times and running at 11 is perfect. That is, and a tush push, that is exactly what Jalen Hurts should do. Throw it about 24 times, run 8 to 12. He's not, I don't want him being Matt Stafford. I don't want him throwing 37 times. I think he had the perfect Jalen Hurts game.
I would agree. I mean, I think he's best when they don't put it all on him. And they're also when they're winning because they can run the ball. and he tonight was a bigger part of that than Saquon. Hit me tonight. There was a visual of Patrick talking to Carson Wentz on the sideline, I think late in the third quarter.
Yeah.
It's like at one point in time, Jalen came in, essentially Wally pipped this guy. They booted him out, and now he's winning the MVP with that guy watching as the backup. I mean, how crazy is this league? This guy was drafted number 2 overall. They gave him $100 million, and then not that many years later, Jalen gets put in the same situation, highly criticized, but figures out a way to become Super Bowl MVP. I never would have thought he would have been this good when he was coming out, and I watched a lot of him at Oklahoma. Obviously, he's improved greatly throughout his time in the NFL. I still think sometimes, he can be a little. Sometimes when he's in the pocket and he doesn't see it right away, he kind of feels lost. But tonight he was completely under control, and when he's under control, and for whatever reason the Chiefs weren't getting home, like sometimes he takes some bad sacks. His running ability is a pretty huge added dimension for his game. And then when his deep ball's on, he's just a tough player to play. And because their receivers are so good, I'm telling you, when he hit that first ball to AJ, I was like, whoa, he's feeling confident tonight because he hit him in stride. And then the rest of the night he never missed.
Yep.
But congratulations to a guy. You play in Philly, and I think he'd tell you, like, I played for Nick Saban for 3 years. Like, I'm used to getting screamed at all the time. Like, I've heard it all. I heard it all by the time I was 21 years old. So not an easy town to play in, man. And he's handled it pretty well.
Yeah, I think, it's the old saying about inner scoreboard, outer scoreboard. I think he's the classic inner scoreboard guy. You see a lot of pro athletes flex or entertainers, and deep down they're just wildly insecure. Jalen Hurts never has to brag. I think it just shows you the inner scoreboard, the inner confidence he has, is he doesn't have to constantly project. He doesn't care what people think. And I think there's that simmering confidence that in any profession, Saban talked about this for years. Warren Buffett's talked about this. There's a lot of talkers. And then there's the guys that they're just really good. They know they're good. They don't have to tell you. And I think that's Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts looks at himself deep down and goes, you know what? I know what I'm good at. I squat 600 pounds. I'm mobile. I'm smart. I'm hardworking. And I'll say it. There are some routes in this league. He throws a beautiful sideline ball. And by the way, tonight he hit on a deep ball, as Brady said during the broadcast. That's a throw of a lifetime. Like, that was a perfect seed down the field.
if I would have told you 10 years ago the Eagles would have two Super Bowls with Nick Foles and Jalen Hurts, who would have thought? I mean, it's just that's the crazy part about football is, Nick wins one as a backup
Well,
quarterback. Jalen's drafted in the second round. People thought it was an insane pick because they had Carson Wentz. A couple years later, they built the whole franchise around him, and now he's Super Bowl MVP. I mean, it just
what did what did Jerry Krause say? Franchises win championships.
And I think the Eagles are a very good example of that because they truly have won it that way as a team. Where I think sometimes, the Chiefs can be very Andy Spags, Mahomes
Yes.
dependent. The two
Yes.
coaches, the schemes, and the quarterback doing stuff. Where the Eagles is like all their guys. I mean, they had random DBs tonight making plays. Cooper DeJean, the second guy they drafted as a pick six. You got, oh, that's not Jalen Hurt, or that's not Jalen Carter. That's their fifth defensive lineman making a sack. It's like, where are these guys coming from?
Sorry to interrupt this great video, but please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Now back to the video. You know, John, one of the many reasons the NFL is king, and you and I are both football guys. I do love the NBA playoffs, and I love March Madness, and I love a good golf major, and I love the World Cup. And by the way, last year I loved baseball
That
playoffs
was
last
excellent.
year. I thought they were just fan. Oh, I thought the National League playoffs were insanely good. But one of the reasons that the NFL continues to have such a visceral connection with us is college football. And the Eagles are an advertisement for get the draft right. And this is why you and I are draft guys. And I've told my friends this for years is you can't buy your way to a championship. All the bad GMs in football overspend in free agency. Where in the NBA, if the Lakers get Luka, you're like in a big trade at the trade deadline. You're like, wow. The Eagles are just an advertisement for you start nailing multiple drafts. That's why you can go get AJ Brown. That's why you can pay Saquon and AJ Brown because you just keep nailing draft pick after draft pick. Like the Rams are in a spot now. They'll keep Stafford, but they've hit on like 6 straight defensive draft picks. If they have another good draft, it's like okay, then you get to the point where you can just go buy elite players.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this to you, and I think it's been well documented. Is once they missed on Jalen Reagor for Justin Jefferson, they had an internal meeting that what are we doing overthinking this? We're going to take the best players from the best program. So when you listed all those players, that was a lot of Alabama and Georgia in that list of players,
Yeah.
and it paid dividends. I mean, it paid big time dividends because from Jalen Carter to Devontae Smith to Landon Dickerson to this year was somewhat unique with Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, but Mitchell is a good example of a guy like Ashton Genty this year with Boise. He could have got $1 million and gone to Alabama, Georgia, or Ohio State, but he chose to stay at his program. That's why he was, I think, Tulane or Toledo. I think it might have been Toledo. And Cooper DeJean was Iowa, which is one of the better defenses in the league. But they're not
Yeah.
drafting little school guys anymore. They've been burned. Carson, I think, that situation. And then obviously the Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson at the time was the COVID draft. And remember, the Minnesota Vikings were on the clock next, and they go to the video of Spielman, and he's laughing, him and Zimmer, because they couldn't believe that they didn't just take Justin Jefferson. And that scarred Howie. And Howie's come back swinging. I mean, to go to two Super Bowls in 3 years, uh, and let's face it, this was a lot different team than 2 years ago, right? Kelsey's gone, Fletcher Cox gone, so they had to kind of, reshape the squad with some impact players, and they did it with, Jurgens and Landon Dickerson inside and Adam Becton. But to me, Jalen Carter, who, tonight's not going to be his greatest performance, but what he's meant to him this year, I mean, that is,
He was
he
sick
was,
all week.
he's a dominant,
Yeah.
dominant impact player.
Yeah, it's you
Their
know who
roster
else
is
I thought
really
won?
good. I mean, it's loaded.
You know what else I thought tonight, John? You know who else won tonight? Myles Garrett. If you're in the target zone of Philadelphia, I'm sitting around and I'm looking and I'm Buffalo, or maybe I'm Kansas City, or I'm one of these teams. I'm the Rams, and I think to myself, look at Philadelphia's roster, guys. We can't catch up to that in a draft. We're paying Stafford too much. Any one of these teams,
Yeah.
maybe it's the Chargers. But I'm watching this tonight and I'm thinking, boy, if I'm a GM in a weak draft, Myles Garrett makes up a
Well,
lot of ground.
I'll tell you who will sniff around on Myles Garrett. It'll be Howie and the Eagles, because Josh Sweat, I think he is a free agent. Milton Williams definitely is, and Bond is too. Though I think they'll want to keep him and maybe franchise him at worst. But I could see them offering 2 first-round picks and paying Myles Garrett, and just letting Sweat and Milton Williams go and just plug him right in there with your young guys. I mean, Howie
I don't
100% will
think it's a
be in
bit.
the mix. I'll promise you that.
You know, I was thinking about this tonight. The crowd was about 70-30 Philadelphia, and a lot of that is because Philadelphia is just a much bigger city and they've got more fans, and it's probably a closer flight. And there's a lot of people in Philadelphia that make a lot of money. It's a major, your typical East Coast city with a lot of affluence. And I got to be honest with you, I'm very happy for Philadelphia. I thought Kansas City would win, but John, I've said this before. When the SEC was kicking everybody's ass, I used to say, well, they care
Yeah.
more. There's no reason Ohio State football's that good. Ohio's not a rich state, but they have the biggest NIL. The state has probably 15 good high school players a year, really elite high school players. USC should be better. Texas should be better. Georgia should be better. The Florida school should be better. Ohio State just cares more. And when the SEC was crushing everybody, my take was, okay, it means more. It's like the slogan. You worked for the Philadelphia Eagles. They freaking care. Go listen to sports talk radio in Philadelphia. Go look at the ratings of sports talk radio in Philadelphia. They are so passionate. And I got to be honest with you, when I was a sportscaster on the West Coast and I was doing morning drive radio and the 11 o'clock news, I remember one time one of the announcers in town came up to me. He was an older guy and he said, "You're going to kill yourself. You're sleeping 4.5, 5 hours a night." And then I moved to ESPN on the East Coast. And my takeaway was everybody works like that in the East Coast. It's just like that's like on the West Coast, I was a workaholic. In the East Coast, I was just a worker. And my take is Philadelphia just so deeply cares. The media, the fans, the organization, Howie Roseman. I just have so much damn respect for the Eagles. I'm not unhappy tonight.
Their owner cares a lot. He pumps a lot of money into that franchise. When you and I record a podcast, what day would that have been? Wednesday when I got to New Orleans. Maybe it was Tuesday, and I went out and met some people from the Eagles and the Chiefs. The way they talked about the Eagles draft room, I mean, the amount of money that Jeffrey Lurie built building their draft room, which is relatively new. I mean, it's like second to none. It's stuff, in the NFL, Clark Hunt takes a lot of crap because he doesn't pump that much money into stuff. And he goes, well, this isn't college. We're not recruiting here. This is the NFL, right? That has never been Jeffrey Lurie's thing, that he has invested a ton. So it really does start there. But, and I've seen this with the Warriors, you got to win or else he gets edgy and they'll start firing people.
Right.
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 But they win, they'll pay guys. I mean, look at last year. Their season ended. That was pretty crazy. They started 10-1, and then they couldn't win a game. Their defense was atrocious, and they got destroyed. I think, was it Monday Night Football against the Bucks? I think 32-9. They fire everybody. It felt like, besides Sirianni, Howie, and the players. They build a new staff. They get the highest paid defensive coordinator, and Kellen Moore, that they had a unique relationship with because he was with the Cowboys forever, and they paid him a lot of money. And it paid dividends immediately. We all agree Vic Fangio is one of the best defensive coordinators in the league, and Kellen Moore immediately becomes a head coach. Like, the one thing is with Philly, and this is true with Andy Reid back in the day and now in Kansas City, you go work there as a coach, as an executive, like, you go places. It's one of those places that, like, sends you to greater heights. And I think it's a lot because, like you said, the vibe in the building. I remember coming from Fresno State, from Pat Hill, who had worked at Belichick, and my first week, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to last. This is like Wall Street. I mean, it's just intense. I'm 24 years old. It's just we're in OTAs. I'm like, this Howie Roseman guy is insane. But there's just, he has an ambition and an energy that, talking to people when I was in New Orleans, that's no different from what I've been told than it was 15 years ago. And I've heard that about Andy Reid forever. His work ethic now is no different than it was in 2007. Still gets to the office at the same time, still the same passion. These guys are just driven on that. Phil Savage used to call it the football treadmill, and Saban and Belichick would get on it. in the beginning of like July or the beginning of August when camp would start, and they just never break stride until the season ends. Where most guys, in football, hell, I'd get exhausted, but they are just unfazed by the pressure, by the games, by the injuries. And I think, I think Howie and, Andy, I mean, Andy already was a Hall of Famer. I don't see Howie, two Super Bowls, two different coaches, two different quarterbacks in a 5, 6 year span, Colin. That's pretty unheard of in this modern day NFL.
Yeah,
As a
it's
guy that does have all the power,
you,
that some GMs don't, like he does.
yeah, it's Nick Sirianni is so fascinating
Super
to
Bowl
me
champ.
because I've said before, um, I was thinking about this tonight. There are two different kind of coaches, and I'm talking successful coaches. There's two types of coaches that are successful in this league. There's the scheme guys. Shanahan is a scheme guy. Andy Reid is a scheme guy.
Kevin O'Connell.
Belichick, Kevin O'Connell. I think Belichick
Yeah.
defensively was a scheme guy. And then there's culture guys. Vrabel, I think I think Dan Campbell. I think Jim Harbaugh is known as McVay's a little bit of both, where he's got great culture, but he can do the schemes. But you generally it's like that for years and years. They talked about the walk around coaches. Some guys call plays, other guys are like Jimmy Johnson. They walk around and they coach their coaches. Saban was always like that. He coaches his coaches. But Sirianni, I don't know what he is. He's not a scheme guy, clearly. The minute he gives up play calling, they're better. He doesn't feel like he's the culture guy. It feels more like it's Howie and Lurie. I don't know how to categorize him, and this is not a criticism of him. I was thinking about this tonight watching the game. It's like there are people that, I mean, I don't have a strong opinion. My take is maybe he's a perfect fit for
Yeah.
Philly. Maybe this roster is so damn good that it's hard to screw it up. What do we classify Sirianni as? A guy that literally his position coaches literally had to confront him because he was jawing at like Jalen Carter. It's like, what the hell am I watching?
I will say this, talking to people in New Orleans, the people in the building really, really like him. So he is well liked and has a lot of respect from players and coaches. Tonight, the way they came out, he is in charge of just the messaging of the team, right? Team meetings.
Yeah.
They were ready and they were loose. They didn't feel tight. They came out swinging. If Nick Sirianni was Jim or John Harbaugh and his team had just looked like that, we would be calling it one of the great Super Bowl performances in recent memory, right? Because like you said, we don't have that many blowouts in the internet age. They were all like when I was a kid in the 90s. Those type games don't really exist. And he just did it in some way because of, I don't want to say the negative connotation around him, but I think fans and definitely people that talk about football probably don't put him on the same level as some of these other guys. But he has
Right.
been to two Super Bowls in 3 years, and he
Right.
went toe to toe with Andy Reid in the last one. He beat the crap out of him in this one. It's got to mean something. So I've been hard on him, but I don't. You got to give him his credit and his flowers for this performance because his team, they just showed up with an edge. And so whether that's knowing the right things to say to your coaches, knowing when to leave them alone, however they handled the Super Bowl week of being loose but also being focused, because approaching these 2 weeks is not easy. They also have some young players. I mean, they're starting multiple rookies. Jalen Carter's a second-year guy, so that they do have young guys, and it's not like Kelce and Fletcher
Yeah.
Cox are there to hold everyone's hand. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for just how focused the team was. I mean, coming out, you could tell early, like, God, the Eagles are here to play. I didn't think it was going to,
Yeah.
a
Well,
quarter in, you're like, okay, the Chiefs will figure it out, but this is going to be hard. And then they just never left their foot off the pedal.
so as we're watching, we started this before the end of the game. Mahomes hit Worthy on a deep ball, plus the 2-point conversion. It's 40-21 now. Here's the good news for Kansas City. Rashee Rice looked like a number one when he got hurt. Worthy now has established himself as a big-time player. They finally have the receiver situation kind of sorted out. They're going to have to figure out tight end. And they're going to draft a left tackle with their first pick. So Kansas City's going to be fine. Let's not, for the record, Brady didn't lose. I mean, one of the great things about Tom Brady is that Brady just didn't lose big very often. And I think so much that's where Brady's underrated. The other day I had him on the show on Friday. Tom just wouldn't call plays if he thought it was trouble. He's the greatest quarterback ever. He and Peyton Manning at the line of scrimmage. They're just either it's smart, either whatever, it's cognitive, it's homework, prep, whatever it is. But I look at this game tonight. It's not going to tarnish Mahomes. And I'm not saying that. But he has now two blowout losses where they look lost in Super Bowls. Do you look at him just slightly differently? Because pregame, we're talking about, is he going to be in that? Are we going to start struggling with the argument? And you kind of watch this thing and you're like, man, they didn't move the chains when Philadelphia was
Yeah, to me,
rolling.
he had a long way to go to catch Tom. I mean, one Tom played till he was 45, won a Super Bowl in his 40s. He beat Mahomes twice. I think that talk was a little premature because even if he had won tonight, he would have won four. Tom has seven. The other thing is Patrick Mahomes, let's say he had won tonight, wasn't not only he wasn't the best quarterback in the NFL, there were multiple quarterbacks better than him. We talk about because of his resume is so much better than Lamar, Josh, and Joe,
Right.
that he gets put ahead of them, and rightfully so. But just on a weekly basis, I mean, Joe Burrow was elite this year. Lamar Jackson was better this year than he was last year, and he won the MVP. And Josh Allen literally just won the MVP. But he beats them in playoff games, and that has an outweighed uh, importance. And I'm all for it, but I just think Patrick Mahomes, I think right where he sits right now, and he's 30 years old, so he has a long way to go, is much more in the Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning, I vividly remember the pick six he had in the Sean Payton Super Bowl in 2009, the Tracy Porter.
Yeah.
He played was it Seattle in their first Super Bowl, and they won 70-0 or whatever the score. I mean, they housed them when the first play was snapped over. So it's, Peyton Manning had some weird playoff moments. Tom's career is pretty unprecedented. And even Patrick is, like you said, I mean, the point differential in the two games, Tom didn't have those games. Now, I also think you can call plays for Patrick, and Patrick can do things in plays that gets him in situations when it's not going well. He's doing 360s and running into sacks. Tom Brady didn't have that. Tom had to, if he was under duress, the ball is either going to Julian Edelman or Gronk quick, or he's throwing the ball away or hitting the ground. He's not doing any of that. Patrick Mahomes, I don't want to say hero ball because for a lot of it, it works. Tonight, when it looks bad, when it looks bad, it looks like he's playing like Russell Wilson or something tonight, right? Justin
Yeah.
Fields, and it's just way off.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm in the first half, my takeaway was, oh, Tom would engineer something here. Tom would get rid of the ball. Like I'm watching their routes. Tom would shorten the routes. Tom would go to the sidelines. Tom would say, in that first half, it was 24-0 at half, and everything looked the same. And that's where I think you see the difference with Brady and Mahomes. If Tom had back-to-back poor drives, he would go to the sidelines. He'd bark. He would on the fly just change stuff. And I mean, he said it again on my show Friday. Like I go to the line. If I don't think if we're not lined up, I'm not calling that play. I'm audibling out of that play. I didn't see a lot of that with Mahomes. I think they just kind of stuck with what they were doing. At one point, they showed a shot from behind him, and they were running deep routes in the first half. And I was thinking, guys, you have to shorten every route. You got 2 seconds max to throw.
I think if they could do it over again, they would have tried to run the ball more early. They were passing it nonstop, and it just was not working. Even if you're only gaining a couple yards, it just settles everyone down. They didn't start running it to like the third or fourth drive, and it was already felt like it was too late. And I think they came in with the game plan that they could throw on them. And after that first play where I think they hit Juju for a first down, first play of the game, it was a disaster. Kelsey wasn't moving that fast. They were just out of sync. I mean, their tackles were getting
I think he
smoked.
retires. I think
I think
he
he does too.
retires. Do
Yeah.
you?
I think it's, I mean, I think he's a shell of himself physically. And listen, he's one of the all-time great NFL athletes. I think it really jumped out to me in that Houston Texans game when he had a huge play and he was running. It's like, whoa, he looks way slower.
Let me ask you this: You're Kansas City. Travis Kelce retires. He's off the books. Chris Jones, you go get Myles Garrett. Kelsey's gone. I mean, you're not paying your receivers. You're paying Mahomes, Chris Jones, Myles Garrett. Your receivers are all free. You're going to draft a left
Yeah.
tackle. You're not paying your running backs. You're not paying a lot of these young defensive players. You're not paying McDuffie yet. Why can't Kansas City look at this game and go, let's go get Myles Garrett?
I mean, I think they would think long and hard about it. I mean, they'll be in the mix.
I
Yeah, I mean,
would.
they've made trades like this before. They'll make them again. So yeah, I wouldn't be. They'll
John,
be sniffing around.
I mean, he may not be Reggie White or Lawrence Taylor or Aaron Donald. He is the closest thing to
I
it
think he's pretty close.
in the
I think
sport.
he's. I think if he played for the Chiefs or the Ravens or the Packers or the Niners, I think we would talk about him closer to that than he plays for the Browns. So he doesn't get quite discussed like that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there are these players. How often, and he's still, I think, in his prime.
Oh,
He's in great
freak.
shape. How how often in your lifetime is Reggie White available? Reggie White was available because the owner of the Eagles was so
Yeah.
cheap. He was asking players to pay for equipment, if you remember. This was pre Jeffrey Lurie. It was a mess. I think the owner had hired Rich Kotite. He let Reggie White go. He was just a mess as an owner. It's like Myles Garrett, Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo already allowed Kansas City to draft Mahomes and Worthy. And by the way, Trent McDuffie. I mean, they moved up for Trent McDuffie. Like if I'm Buffalo, I go buy Myles Garrett. I figure out a way to make it work. I'm not paying James Cook. I'm not paying my tight end Kincaid. I'm not paying Campbell the receiver. I mean, I don't know. I look up Myles Garrett and I'm watching the Eagles tonight. And if I'm Kansas City or Buffalo, I'm like, guys, how do we make up ground considerably in an offseason? This is a weak draft. It can't be the draft.
Yeah.
I just think I kept saying tonight watching this, I'm like, if Myles Garrett's agent should feel
I would
great.
throw the NFC North teams in there as well. The Packers. I know the Lions have Aiden Hutchinson, but I did want two of them. I would throw the Vikings too if they end up not going with Sam Darnold and they let Sam Darnold go somewhere else and they're going to go with J.J. McCarthy. They should be all over Myles Garrett as well. So I think the teams that are drafting in the 20s, not only are every single one of those teams on the phone with the Cleveland Browns already, I think they've already made like substantial offers. Like just to let you know, our starting offers are 2 1s and a 2. We're open for business. Counter offer us. You see our 53-man roster. You see our draft picks. If you want more, shoot me an email. But that's where we start, and you guys come back at us because I think clearly the Browns don't want egg on their face. Like you never want to be the person trading great players who, like you said, this is not a fat, overweight, aging guy. I mean, he is a physical
Oh,
freak. He's like
God.
LeBron of football, but he was
Yeah.
smart about it. He handled it in a classy way. Then he went to the media row or whatever and just kind of doubled down in just in a very measured way. Sometimes these can feel a little like, ugh, this is weird. I was like, yeah, I respect this guy. I wouldn't want to play in Cleveland either if I was him. Right? I mean, I have an opportunity to be an all-time great. I'm stuck here. We also have the situation of Deshaun Watson's anchor contract, and I don't see the playoffs coming for the foreseeable future. We got Joe Flacco lightning in a bottle. When's that happening again? Probably not. And if you're Cleveland, you can ship him out. You can kind of reset while you have this Deshaun Watson albatross of a contract for another $100+ million on the books. You got the number 2 pick. You trade Myles Garrett, and you kind of restart your franchise.
40-22 Eagles in an absolute rout. Um, God,
It's not good for Dallas. I was thinking
I
about
wish.
that. I mean, we got
Oh no, I
we
wrote
got
this down.
Washington who's
I wrote
figuring
I
it
wrote this
out. You
down.
got the Eagles who are going
No,
to be awesome again
listen,
next year. The NFC is just really
I
good.
wrote this down. Dallas needs 6 to 7 more elite players to compete with Philadelphia. 6 to 7 more elite players. That's why I've said, do you move? Because I think Micah Parsons is a good player. I don't think he's close to Myles Garrett or T.J. Watt. I don't think he's in that class. My take is, do you move him and get 2 first-round picks? Dallas just doesn't have the offensive firepower. Now Dak's off his second injury. No, I wrote it down. I kept this. I thought Philadelphia, this resonates with a lot of teams. I'm thinking Dallas has to look at this and goes, shit, we need 6 more good players. And if you're paying CeeDee Lamb and Dak, we're not getting them in the draft. It's a weak draft. We have to move people and hit on draft picks. I mean, I don't want to be, again, you know, hyperbolic, but you just looked this. Andy Reid does not get humiliated. I mean, it's like they got humiliated in a Super Bowl where their left tackle got hurt late. They could not move the chains. It was funny because my producer Ryan sent me something during the game. He said it's the fewest first half yards with Mahomes as quarterback ever. They had 23 total yards in the first half, 45 penalty
That's
yards.
crazy.
What you watched was one of the greatest dismantling. In the first half, they had one first down and two turnovers. This thing was, and that's Mahomes and Reed, and that's Kelce. Jesus.
I think one thing the Chiefs, Pacheco's a solid player, but they could just use, I mean, obviously like a Saquon or a McCaffrey, but just draft a guy in like the second or third round who's just a really good starter and who can be your starting running back behind him for a long time. I think that would, or a tight end, one of those two positions with Kelsey going, because that position helps. I mean, how much does that help Jalen Hurts just being able to dump it off to Goddard or throw it to Saquon all the time? Because it was so evident through that game. Obviously, they hit some huge plays to AJ and Devontae Smith and even uh, to Goddard as well. But they also just have some easy first downs where you're like the Chiefs, how hard did they have to work to gain like 3 yards? It's like this is not sustainable.
Oh,
Like this is not possible. I actually think Micah Parsons. I think the Chiefs would be all over him as well. I mean, it would not shock me. I think remember Steven had some comments toward the end of the season that you only have so much money to build a team, doesn't make sense. Obviously, you want to have Micah Parsons on your team, but financially. And then I saw Rap Sheet said today, like they've already had internal discussions. I think Myles Garrett is a better all around player, but I think when you
oh
when you
yeah.
look at his age and this would be his first contract, I think you're getting multiple ones and a two. Like they would get a haul for Micah Parsons and the good
Yep.
teams. I think what would complicate it for the Cowboys is like, would you trade Micah Parsons, or would they do it to the Packers, the Lions? Probably not, or the Washington. Obviously, they wouldn't do it to Washington. So you bring up the Bills. Like if Micah Parsons, you should be all over Micah Parsons if you're the Bills.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, because listen, Kansas City's dropped 35 plus points against Buffalo every time they play in these playoff games, like with Sean McDermott. So listen, you got to create something. Sometimes these markets like Green Bay or Buffalo, because the media, part of the success of Philadelphia is the media is so
Oh,
relentless. And I can remember when I lived in Connecticut listening to WFAN and occasionally WIP. And there was no question that front offices were pressurized, no question, by the onslaught of fans. Owners listen to fans. Owners talk to GMs. And I do think it's one of the advantages in the Northeast. Right now, the Celtics are the best NBA team, and the Eagles are the best NFL team. And that, in baseball, the Dodgers just buy the best
yeah.
players. But I do think there's a pressurized environment, and it's like normalized now. Like everybody understands you go play in the East, the media's tough. The fans are tough. Like it's just part of it. I mean, everybody, if you can't handle it, don't go there. And, I think these markets like Green Bay and Buffalo, it's let's be honest, the media's not as loud, it's more supportive. I mean, in Philadelphia, Sean McDermott is out of a job. It's done. He's already been canned. If he could not beat a team where you felt like you had at least as talented a quarterback, McDermott would be gone in Philadelphia. And so I think, sometimes those markets, they're too nice. Buffalo and Green Bay. I, to me, both those teams need Myles Garrett. You're not going anywhere. I mean, it's like I like LaFleur, I like McDermott. Buffalo's not winning that game. They get outcoached and outplayed. Just go buy him. So go trade for him. I'd love to see it. It's funny. I'm trying to wrap tonight's game in a bow before I move on for about 10 minutes on something else. I'm just I'm not unhappy. Philadelphia front office ownership quarterback down earned tonight. Good for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened to him last year, their turnaround this year, the Saquon Barkley signing. I mean, it's just an all-timer, Colin. It's just
Yeah.
you see it in basketball and baseball, football free agency. The days of like Reggie White or Deion Sanders, it just doesn't really happen anymore with franchise tags.
Yeah.
It's just very rare. I mean, great players change teams, but it's usually big trades in the NFL. It's very rare a guy, 25, 26-year-old blue chip guy is just available on the open market. Uh, and how he signed him. And then the guy ran for a total, I think if you count the playoffs, like 2,500 yards. So, I mean, just pr very cool moment for him. Jalen had a good game and he takes a lot of shit, but Jalen's been making 50 million for a couple years. Like he's pretty well established as a good
Yeah.
player. The Saquon situation, anytime you're drafted really high and you go to a shitty team, and everyone's like, well, is he really worth it? We all agree he wouldn't have been as good on the Giants. But it's pretty clear it wasn't his fault when he was on the Giants. It's all the Giants. Because if you put that guy on a good team, man, I mean, it's only one season, but that's like a Hall of Fame level season. 1 year, goes to the Eagles, pretty much leads their offense to the Super Bowl, and they're Super Bowl champs. So congrats to Saquon Barkley. That's really cool.
And now for our next segment, Whiskey Business, brought to you by Green River Whiskey, the official whiskey of the Colin Cowherd podcast. If you want to enjoy life's simple pleasures, reach for Green River Whiskey. Whether it's rye whiskey, single barrel bourbon, you're getting over a century of craftsmanship packed into every bottle. Hop on over to greenriverwhiskey.com and discover a legend in a bottle today. Before we go, how about 5 minutes on this? Jordan Schultz and then Jay Glazer reported the Jets moved off Aaron Rodgers. So for the second time in a couple of years, a team, as Aaron flew out to New York thinking positively, optimistically it would happen, they moved off him. I think the Colts and the Raiders work. I think Chip Kelly, they have 2 tackles, they have a center, they have 2 good tight ends. They need a running back and a receiver. I think the Raiders works for Aaron Rodgers. He'd take that over the Colts and Shane Steichen. But, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, late in their careers, leave and have some success.
Yeah.
Brett Favre did as well, got to an NFC championship, a throw from the Super Bowl. Are you surprised that it was just 2 years of nothing and the second team bailed on him? I'm not, but are you?
No, because as the season went on, it got pretty weird between Aaron and the owner. And I listened, you recorded something before the Super Bowl about, this new culture coming in. Aaron Glenn's a former high-level player. So it's like, do I want to
Yes.
deal with some old aging, what's the hardest thing to deal with sometimes in pro sports? An aging former superstar, especially one that's a little different. Peyton Manning that last year. Remember Kubiak and Elway had to sit him down and like it was difficult. He took a pay cut. These are tough conversations. But I think it was pretty clear that the Johnson family was over this guy about 2 months left to go in the season. I wonder if part of the interviews was like, Aaron's done here. Which most of these new coaches, who cares? Like, it's not like, okay, fine. I don't need him anyway. I think the question now is he even tradable? Because he's on the books for this year. His cash, his cap hits $23 million. Like, I honestly think they'd probably have to cut him. I wonder if anyone would
Yeah, I
even
think they
trade for
are.
him. So it's like they just
No,
cut
I
him.
think they'll
You
cut
cut
him.
him, and then
Yeah.
someone signs him for 10 million bucks. I mean, is that what he's getting? Kind of a unique, because
I
if you
don't
think
know.
about it, Roethlisberger's arm gave out on him. It was clear, but he just ends as a Steeler. Manning's arm doesn't work, wins the Super Bowl, but then no one would re-sign him. Breeze's arm started going, and it just ended. Is he really just going to go play? Like, what if the Titans outbid that and they give him 12 million? The Raiders were only willing to give him, say he's going to finish his career on the Titans. Because I do think it wouldn't just be those two. I think a lot of teams would be interested just to try to get their franchise. These owners give them a little oomph. If you got some cap space, I'll give Aaron Rodgers $15 million.
Well,
If you're the
think about
Titans,
this.
why wouldn't you pay him?
If Yeah, he has a house in Nashville. I mean, let's say, hey, listen, we'll give you 2 years. You got a house in Nashville. It's an easy division. And then you have that number 1 pick. You could trade down, get a bunch of players around him. It's just interesting. I was told that Aaron Glenn, for the people that didn't hear my pre-Super Bowl 15-minute rant, I was told by somebody I trust that Aaron Glenn, coming from a really strong culture in Detroit, wants to mimic that, right? Duplicate that in New York, and he didn't want Aaron Rodgers, the player or the person, in the room. And they'll say all the right stuff. But in the end, I mean, Green Bay caught him off guard. The Jets kind of caught him off guard. Aaron has that disease of has to be the smartest guy in the
Yeah.
room. I'm going to do my own homework on the internet. And, I think in the end, Aaron, I mean, I could write chapters in a book on things I've heard from people that have been around him. He's a really moody guy. You can get good Aaron or bad Aaron. But in the end, he's just not good enough now. He's probably the 15th best quarterback in the league. He's just not good enough for the BS you deal with. Like he's not early to the locker room. He's not optimistic. Like Brady to the end, I mean, was just like high energy, high optimism, high standards. I'm not sure Aaron loves the game. I think, how when you ever work with somebody or you have somebody in your family and they're like, I work hard. And you're like, dude, hard work is 65 hours a week, not 42. I think Aaron says he loves the game. I don't see it. I don't see that just unbridled, like just relentless passion for it. I think Aaron thinks he loves the game, but he doesn't love it. He doesn't love it the way the guys that I see it in pro sports
I
love
think
it.
it'll be very telling that when they cut him, if he's only getting 7, 8, $10 million offer, he doesn't need the money, right? He's worth hundreds of millions of
Right,
dollars at this
right,
point in time. It was clear he did not want to get hit last year. Don't blame him. He's 40 years old. So is he going to
right.
go play for some of these teams? Pete Carroll calls, the Titans call. It's like, yeah, this might not go well again, right? The one thing Aaron Rodgers has a good feel for the most of his career is what a good team looks like. So this could be really like you go sign up for one of these teams. Best case scenario might be like 7 wins, and struggled to stay hurt last year on a roster that's going to be better more than likely than one of these teams interested in you. So I wonder if he gets to the point where it's like, am I really going to do 1 year for 8, 9, $10 million? It's one thing, the
Yeah, I
Jets
don't
this year
think he
paid him
will.
$35 million. If someone was willing to pay him that, I think he would for sure play. But
Sure,
I have a
sure.
hard time if you're $10 million and it's like his best option is the Titans. Him just going, I'm just gonna go hang out in Malibu and just kick it.
Yeah, he's got a beautiful house. I watched that documentary Enigma, and it was interesting. I watched the first episode, was bored out of my mind. I gave it a second episode, that was better.
I
Third
gave it like
episode,
10
like
minutes
the
and
more
I
you
turned it
watch,
off. I'm like, I don't even care. It just wasn't for me.
yeah,
You're a better man than me.
yeah, yeah. So I kind of felt like for the audience, I had to go watch it. But I just think he's just a different cat. And I think over the last 6 or 7 years, he's gotten to be really high maintenance. But um, I don't know what the Jets are going to do at quarterback. But I ran into Chip Kelly Saturday night briefly, and this was before I knew the Aaron news. And my take is that's probably the best place for him. Honestly, it's probably the best. If I was him, I can be closer to Malibu. It's probably the
I
best
saw a
place for him.
headline today that the Raiders might be interested in Sam Darnold. And I actually ran into Sam Darnold at the hotel gym the day I was leaving. And I talked to him again in the elevator. One thing that really stands out to me, I had a bunch of players staying at the hotel I was staying at. Ran into like LaDainian and
Yeah,
Tomlinson. And I know Lorenzo Neal really well. So I went up and talked to him about Low Neal. And a lot of just good, easygoing guys. Like you can just have a normal conversation with LaDainian and Tomlinson, like in the hotel gym for
yeah,
5 minutes, where it's like,
yeah,
this is one of the great running backs in the history of the league. Like I don't know if the equivalent in some of these other sports would just do that. But these guys, Sam Darnold, who just had one of the great seasons in the league, he's just BSing with me about where he's going to play golf this summer in LA. Just an easygoing group of people. And my theory's always been is they have the most in common with normal people because their job is one, they get cut all the time. One, they also get
yeah,
screamed at their job a lot. Like if it's not going well, you're getting criticized by your bosses like normal human beings do. And they just communicate very well with famous people, which I think can be a struggle with
yeah.
people making a lot of money. And I was just very impressed with all the players that I ran into at the hotel, just had brief conversations with.